Welcome, everybody. We're going to kick off a little webinar about the conservation planning atlases that have been put together by landscape conservation cooperatives that are four that are overlapping in Texas. And before I turn it over to the presenters, I just wanted to let you know that in some thinking about this, this is a tool for LCC partners to use in ways that they find helpful. This is a way to share information. It's a way for partners to share information. It's a way to go develop new mapping products or utilize, develop science and data layers and things like that. And so it's set up to be an interactive process. It's a setup for the partnership itself to improve. And so I hope as you listen today and think about it some, that maybe it'll stimulate a little bit of use and maybe stimulate other ways to be interactive with it in the future and see it as a resource. And so we'll have a lot of time for questions at the end today, and so maybe we'll have a little time for discussion about some of that as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Blair, Christine, and Cynthia. I really appreciate their efforts to put something together for Parks and Wildlife, and I'll just turn it over to them and let them do some further introductions.
Great. Thanks a lot, Jeff. And so I'll just kind of start off here. I'm going to work through a PowerPoint, just go over some of the basic features and components of the CPA and go through a simple example of how you can use the CPA web mapping tools. And then I'm going to transfer it over to Christine, and she's going to give you a couple of more examples. And then we'll open it up to questions, so feel free to ask us anything about the CPA. I can bring it up live, and we can look at anything in particular if you're interested in a specific function or a data set. So please feel free to ask. So I'm Blair Turpak. I'm the GIS coordinator for the Gulf Coast Prairie LCC, and I'm giving this talk, or at least this part, I'm giving this talk in conjunction with Christine Evans. She's the geomatics coordinator for the Gulf Coastal Plains and Ozarks LCC. And Cynthia Edwards, who works with both of our LCCs. I wasn't sure how familiar everyone on the call would be with what LCCs are, so I just wanted to spend just a moment introducing them or reminding you all what an LCC is. So landscape conservation cooperatives, they are self-directed, non-regulatory conservation partnerships with private and state and federal agencies and organizations and NGOs, and we exist to define, design, and deliver landscapes capable of sustaining natural and cultural resources at desired levels now and into the future. So it's kind of a mouthful, but we try to work at large scale, thinking about now and the future. There are 22 LCCs across North America. We do blend into Canada and Mexico, as well as the Caribbean and the Pacific Islands. And as you can see, these are fairly large partnerships. Just as an example, the Gulf Coast Prairie, my LCC, is 120 million acres in size. All right. So what's a conservation planning atlas? It's a web-based online mapping tool. And it allows users to easily find, access, and integrate existing data and tools to help to support conservation planning and delivery. Just a little bit on the technical side here, it's a combination of DataBasin and ScienceBase. DataBasin is your viewer and the user interface, so when you're interacting with the CPA, you're interacting with DataBasin. And ScienceBase is where we store most of the data that's on the CPA. I just mentioned this now because you're going to see these names and terms kind of pop up all around, so I just wanted you to be familiar with them. All right, so why do we need a conservation planning atlas? We as a conservation community have been pretty good at creating a lot of these spatial data sets and tools, like the really neat Ecological Systems Map that was created by Texas Parks and Wildlife. We've got species models, distribution data, scenario data like urbanization, future urbanization, as well as sea level rise. We have in-stream flow data, all kinds of really helpful, interesting data sets and tools that are designed to help us make conservation decisions on the ground. where we fall behind sometimes is getting that spatial information into the hands of the people who are actually making those spatial decisions. I'm talking about land managers, project leads, your chiefs. So people who are making decisions that have a spatial component, but they might not necessarily have any GIS software, they might not know that this data exists. So we try our best to put it all in one place and also make it easy to use, and we target it to people who are not necessarily use GIS software on a daily basis. But those folks also can use this this tool. And so to use this tool, all you need is an internet connection. It's free. You don't even technically need to sign up, but you get a little bit more functionality if you sign up for the CPA as well. This is not obviously the first online mapping tool. I know you guys have plenty of these in Parks and Wildlife on your own. And these are great tools that were built to do a specific thing. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel here with the Conservation Planning Atlas. What we think the CPA brings to the table is that it allows you to bring in multiple data sets and overlay them that are already out there, and then you can bring in your own data sets. The land that you're currently working on or the park that you're working in, you can bring those data sets in as well and see how all of these data sets overlay with each other and what kind of information and decisions you can make by looking at this data together. As I said, there are 22 LCCs. There are 4 within the state of Texas. Just going west to east, we start in the Desert LCC, which is in the Chihuahuan Desert, then over to the Great Plains, the Gulf Coast Prairie, that's the Edwards Plateau, Cross Timbers, Tamalupin, Brushland area, and then lastly in the Gulf Coastal Plains and Ozarks in the West Gulf Coastal Plain. 3 of these LCCs have Conservation Planning Atlas gateways. You might ask why there are 3 and why not just 1 for the state of Texas. And I want you to think of these individual gateways more as filters. So we have, while there's 3 LCCs, each of these gateways will highlight the data within that geography. So when you go into the GCP, you're not finding data necessarily that's just in West Texas. However, if you're in the GCP and you're thinking, well, I really want to see the Alligator Gar Decision Support Tool that I know was built by the Gulf Coastal Plains and Ozarks, I can easily change some search filters within the GCP to easily find that data within there. Or as you see along the bottom of these screens, there's a really easy way to kind of jump in between gateways. So they're really just, they're not really separate entities. They're all connected. We're just trying to make it easier for folks to find data within the geography that they're looking in. And so just to be clear, the 3 that we have in Texas are for the Desert LCC, the Gulf Coast Prairie, and the Gulf Coastal Plains and Ozarks. One other neat feature I wanted to highlight is that the CPA is now in Spanish. And so the Desert and the GCP do go into Mexico. And so being bilingual is pretty important. All right, so I'm going to briefly go over some of the features for the CPA. So you can easily browse for data. This is the main toolbar for the CPA. You'll find it anywhere you go within the CPA, and you can easily browse for data. You can browse for data sets, maps, and galleries. Assuming you all are familiar with the data set, that's something like the Texas land cover. A map is just multiple data sets that are put together, so say the land cover and the conservation estate. And a gallery is just a combination of data sets, maps, and even other galleries, as well as any kind of documents, PDFs, Excel sheets, that are all focused on a certain topic. So if you look here, this is a screenshot of a gallery for Texas. And this is a folder that's just decision support tools and species models just for the state of Texas. So it's just a way of helping you find data that you'd be interested in within each of these gateways. If you're looking for something in particular, we have a search function up here in the upper right. and you can find it throughout the CPA. You can just type in whatever keywords you're looking for, so Texas, bobwhite quail, flow, soil data, any one of the, whatever it is that you're looking for, and you can search within that gateway that you've gone in through. You can also search all of the LCC gateways or all of Databasin or your own content. You can also do a geographic search. So if you're working in the mid-Texas coast and you want to know what data is available there, you just zoom into that area, do a search, and you can find, and it'll show you what data is available within that geography. Once you find a data set that you're interested in, you just click on it and it will open to the home page of that data set. So just a little navigation here in the upper right. It'll give you a description of what that data set is. This will show you who created this data set, where the data set is currently housed, and who you can contact if you have any questions about the data. If this seems like something that's interesting to you, this is the Solute Urbanization Model. This predicts urbanization out to the year 2100. It gives you a probability that an area will be urban in a given year. You can either open that data set into a dynamic web map and explore it a little bit more and see how, say, San Antonio is going to grow over time. Or you can download that data, and you'll download the actual GIS files, and you can use them on your computer, send them to a GIS person, whatever it is that you want to do with that data. One last feature that I want to go over before we run through a quick example is talk about group planning. Group planning is a really great way to do collaborate on a project. And so anyone can become a member of a group. Once you're a member of a group, anyone in there can share data and upload data. So it's really great for when you're working through a process, you have an intermediate product or a draft product. You can upload it to the CPA and then have feedback from folks on whether or not this data makes sense or it's showing what it needs to show. Again, sharing it with folks who might not have any GIS capability. Within the groups, you're able to make a data set private and then share that data with only those who are in the group. You can control that data some more as well as by whether or not that anyone can download the data or not. So a really good way to share data that you, spatial data that you might not necessarily want everyone to be able to see now, but also it might be good for a data set where just a JPEG is probably a little too hard to see all that's what's going on in the data set. All right, I'm just going to walk through now a quick example of how to use some of the basic tools within the online mapping tool environment. I'm going to walk through making a decision. Don't worry too much about the decision and whether or not this, how much this makes sense. This is really just trying to give you an example of how to use a tool. So let's say I am working on the golden cheek warbler, and I want to identify an area where I can work on the golden cheek and also affect as many other species as possible. So I'm looking to narrow down an area. A good place to start would be the distribution of the golden cheek warbler, or the range map. So that's what I have here. I click on Open in Map, and that's going to bring me into a dynamic web map. Just to give you a little idea where things are here, this is your main toolbar here across the top, and we're going to go over how to use some of these function here in just a minute. But these are your basic navigation tools. This is panning around, zooming in and zooming out. What's neat about the way this is set up, if you put your cursor over it, any of the tools, it'll actually give you a description of what that tool is. So that's pretty neat, and you can see this when we go live. This is your table of contents here, and this is your legend. All right, so we're looking at the range of the golden cheek warbler during its breeding season. You all probably recognize this as the Edwards Plateau. Here's the I-35 corridor. Okay, this is a good starting point, but I need some more data. So I'm going to go over here and click on the Add Dataset button. I can either search for specific data sets, or I can browse for data if I don't quite know what I'm looking for. So I know the folks at Texas Parks and Wildlife have been building this ecological index model, and so I'm going to click on that and add that to my map. And I don't think this is quite public yet, but I know this is Dwayne German and Amy Truer-Keen have been working on this, and Amy let me borrow this data. So what you're looking at here are 12-digit HUCs, and there is the ecological indexes have been applied to this. So essentially what it's doing is looking at where current habitat is and where species occurrences have been, and they're given a weight based on the quality of the habitat and the species that are there. And then these have been averaged across multiple species that have been identified as important within the Edwards Plateau. So really simply, the areas here in dark blue are better for with more species. There's less species within the yellow areas. Okay, so this is helping me kind of maybe narrow down. So it's still a little bit busy, so I'm going to go and try and filter out these data sets a little bit to make it help me narrow down where I want to work. So I can go over here to the golden cheek warbler, go to the tools and go to style. What this is going to let me do is just kind of change the way it's drawn. So I'm just going to come in here, hollow it out, so it's just a little bit easier to see. So now I've got a better idea of what watersheds are in the range of the golden cheek warbler. To go over here to my select button, and then I just click on that range. It's going to highlight it, and this selection toolbar comes up. And so I click on the selection toolbar, and you can go to Tools for Site Intersection. These tools are also available from the actual data sets. So there's a couple of places to find these tools. You hit Select Intersection. A window is going to pop up, and it's going to ask what data set I want to select from. So here I'm trying to identify what watersheds are within the range of the golden cheek. So I click on the data set, and it's going to highlight them for me. That's great, but we're going to make this a little bit easier to see. So we're going to go back to the selection toolbar, hit filter layer by selection, and it's going to remove anything from the that is not currently intersected with the range. Still a little bit hard to see. I'm going to go to clear selection over here, and that's going to help me see what are the actual ranges of those ecological averages for these watersheds. I still have quite a few watersheds in here, so I'm gonna do a little bit more filtering. So I go back over to my data set, filter, edit filter. It's going to give me my filter window. This is the current filter we have now. So this is the watersheds that are currently intersect the range. I'm going to add another condition. I want to use the weighted average, and I'm going to set that equal to 58.592. And so all that is that's that highest priority class or index class within the for the ecological index. So hit submit, and it's just going to show me those watersheds that are in this top class. So I've done a lot of narrowing down. I've found areas that are within my range, areas and watersheds that are in this top ecological index. So potential to affect more species at one time. So going into so that's great. I want to narrow this down a little bit more. Think about, I want to be able to protect areas that are going to, that are least likely to change in the future. I'm going to add in that urbanization model, that Solute urbanization model I talked about earlier. Just to give you some reference, this area here in black is currently urban, so that's San Antonio right here. And these areas here in red are the probabilities that that area will be urban within a given year. I'm sorry, within 2060 in this instance. So I think I'm pretty interested in these two watersheds here. They're again in my range, top level for the ecological index, and they're not likely to have a lot of urban encroachment in the next 45 years or so. So I decide this is where I want to work. I'm just going to get a little bit more information on this data set. If I select it, I can go back up to my selection toolbar, hit show attributes, and it'll give me all of the tables, give me the table that's for that data set. This is a fairly simple table. It'll give me the actual weighted average plus the hydraulic unit code. That is the unique identifier for each of these watersheds. I can export this table to my computer and use it on my own desktop. I can also export it to a shapefile, so again, do some analysis on my computer or send it to a GIS person to help me with some analysis. I can also export it to a drawing, so that's just saving, essentially, those two watersheds within this map, and it'll give me some basic information about it as well, which is pretty neat. So then I can save this map. All I just need to do is give it a name and a description, and then I can send this map and this information to anyone I'm working with, saying, I think these two watersheds are a good area to work on golden sheep warbler. So that's a really simple example of how to use some of the symbology tools. And I'm going to pass this over now to Christine Evans with the GCPO, and she's going to give you an example with the Louisiana pine snake.
Thanks, Blair. And so I'm going to run through, you're going to see some of the tools kind of being used as if I were a manager and really using this to make a decision. And I'm going to use the Louisiana pine snake, which those folks of you that work in the eastern part of Texas, you are undoubtedly very familiar with this species. For those of you that may not be, this is a fascinating creature. I'm a bird person, but I'm really becoming fascinated by this species. It is extremely rare species to encounter now. It's very imperiled. It only exists now on 5 counties in East Texas and in 4 parishes in western Louisiana. And some biology, because we're all biologists, right? The species has got the smallest clutch size and the largest eggs of any North American snake species. And the pine snake, because of that, has extremely low reproductive rates, and that's part of the reason why they're so imperiled. Another part is that they're almost exclusively dependent on using pocket gopher burrows for their habitat, and almost exclusively feed on pocket gophers. And so their pocket gophers are associated with open pine landscapes. Pine snakes are associated with pocket gophers and de facto associated with open pine landscapes, and those landscapes are limited in the eastern part of Texas, and they also don't move very far as well. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to put myself in the role of the manager and just kind of walk through how you would use this system and the tools that are available to do your conservation planning. Oh, next slide. I just realized I don't have control. Okay, so this is a soil suitability map developed by Dr. Robert Wagner in cooperation with the Forest Service, and I believe it was one of the DoD lands in that area. And basically, it takes into account lots of edaphic features or soil features, and develops essentially a suitability index for where the soil is most suitable for Louisiana pine snake and pocket gopher habitat. Okay, next slide. And what we're going to do first is that is the area that you're seeing is Louisiana pine snake range. Just to put us in context, we're kind of in the Toledo Bend area of eastern Texas. And we're going to first look at protected areas. So basically, we know there's probably a lot of public lands and easement lands in that area. Let's overlay that and see how that overlays on top of where the soil is most suitable for pine snake. And so we're going to search for protected areas on the CPA and then pull in the protected areas database. So go ahead and next slide. And there it is. So we've got a big chunk of that area is covered by Angelina and Sabine National Forest. You've got Davy Crockett over to the west. Fort Polk Wildlife Management Area is a pretty big piece of land. Lots of TNC easements or preserves, lots of smaller state wildlife management areas in both Louisiana and the eastern part of Texas. And you can play around with transparency in the CPAs when you overlay the data sets, so you can actually kind of look at them at the same time. So next slide. So this is what I was talking about transparency. Now we've overlaid the public areas over that soil suitability index, and then we're going to zoom in. Go ahead, next slide. We're going to zoom in on this area. The area in green is essentially where we've got the greatest suitability of habitat for Louisiana pine snake, and you can see we've got a lot of a lot of soil suitability just south of those national forest boundaries and on private lands, but then we've also got some of the higher suitability patches up in the already managed national forest lands in the Toledo Bend area. Okay, next slide. So just to get it a little bit less busy, I'm going to filter that data set down and really only pull out those green areas where we've got high soil suitability. So go ahead. And there we have it. So now we've got the highest soil suitability combined with the public lands data. And you can make this, you can keep adding data sets on top of this to answer whatever questions you might have. Next slide. So what we're going to do is we are going to, say you're a conservation decision maker or you're a management area director or something like that, and you really just want to communicate that there's these areas of high suitability. You can actually, like Blair pointed out, you can go into the CPA and use some of those tools to quickly communicate. And in this case, we're going to draw some boundaries around some of those patches. Go ahead. So in this instance, this is all hypothetical, by the way. None of this is actually happening. But I drew some boundaries that could be considered targeted acquisition areas, and then could, within the national forest, could be considered targeted management areas. And go ahead. And so what you can do is say you are, you've wildlife and you're zeroing in on this and you want to communicate this, but you do have a GIS guy. You can, like Blair may have pointed out, you can take that drawing that you just made and actually export it to a shapefile, ship it off to your GIS guy and say, hey, we need to start looking into these areas. Go ahead. And I think Blair may have shown buffering. You can do whatever type of buffering you want. If you want to be less conservative, you can throw, in this case, I threw a 500-meter buffer on that. Go ahead. And then you can do whatever you want. You can export it or you can save your map. All right, go ahead to the next slide. And then Blair spoke about this a little bit, but this is kind of more of a, one of those smaller land area examples where we've got those polygons that we drew, and we can actually run through some analysis and produce a report of how many acres within that area that we drew, how many acres of that landscape is suitable habitat within each of those polygons. And this question can be asked in many different forms with many different data sets. Go ahead. So this is another example. I'm just going to add another layer of complexity to this. So many of you may be familiar with there's an open pine decision support tool for the West Gulf Coastal Plain that goes into the eastern part of Texas. And the areas in red are the highest priority, or what the data is telling us the highest priority areas to consider managing for open pine are. And so what we can do is say, okay, we've got the soil suitability index, we know we've got this open pine decision support tool, so let's see how those overlay. Go ahead. There we have, the green is the overlay of the soil suitability, the red is the layer of the highest probability of success for open pine management, and we can take that broad polygon that we drew and actually start looking at smaller areas where we can really zone in on areas that the data is telling us to manage for this species. And that's what this is all about, right? So we're trying, the whole point of these conservation planning atlases is to deliver science, is to put the science, the products that are already out there in the hands of the people that need to make the decisions. And so this is a hypothetical but useful example to show you how you can start using this data to really communicate with the folks that you work with the decision makers, with the landowners. Right, go ahead. And so this is just an example of one of the areas that's within the national forest that is high priority for open pine and high suitability for pine snakes. And you can see that the national forest is already managing for open pine landscapes. You can see those gaps in that canopy cover. If you go to the next slide, you will see what it looks like south of that area when you get onto the private lands where the mosaic is a lot different. The management regimes are a lot different, a lot more roads. a lot more agriculture and grazing lands and different stages of succession of pine management. And so these are, you can actually do that in the CPA. You can pull those imagery layers very quickly in as a base map and really start looking at, okay, well, this is what the data looks like, but this is what the imagery looks like. All right, next slide. And then finally, just like Blair said, you can export, you can communicate this however you want. You can save the map, send a link, you can export to a PDF, an image, or even just a straight up PowerPoint slide. Go ahead. So that's just a quick example kind of to put it all in perspective of what you can potentially do. Even if you aren't a GIS person and don't have any GIS skills, you can still get some conservation planning work done and communicate in kind of a new and effective way using multiple different sources of data. So it's a really neat tool. And in fact, I use it all the time. I am a GIS person, and I still use it all the time because in a lot of regards it's a little bit easier than pulling up your desktop GIS, pulling in layers, and doing analysis that way. But this is an example of some of the Texas-specific data sets that are on the CPAs, and then we've got lots of regional data sets as well. I'm not going to go through these one by one, but the data sets include data that was generated through LTC-funded projects, data that's been generated nationally, data that's been generated at the state level, like the Texas Ecological Systems Map. It's really flexible, so if this is piquing your interest and you know of data sets that are out there that would be great to put on this system, it can only be stronger. We're trying to communicate science, the best science to our constituents. All right, I think we've got one more slide here. Yep, so this is just a summary of what you can do if you are thinking about data sets. It should trigger in your mind. Maybe it's out there on the CPA. If I'm a GIS person, this is a clearinghouse too, so you can actually grab and download a lot of these data sets that are out there. If you're not a GIS person or you're lazy like me and just want to kind of throw up a map and do some quick map exercise, you visualize the data through that web mapping application. And you can sit down in a group, or you can do this in a live setting where you guys can work together to make these conservation planning decisions if you'd like. You can also, with permission from database, you can import your own data, and you can use it as your own kind of workhorse in either just in your own page or within a group setting where you guys can communicate back and forth with each other. And you can make that data public or private, so it's really flexible. And then, of course, there's all the basic analysis and planning tools that are available. And I think that is it for this part of it. Here is where you would sign up when you go to one of these conservation planning atlases. At the top, along the top ribbon, there is a sign up, and it's absolutely free. And the only reason to sign up is it allows you to download the data sets if you like, and I believe you have to be signed up to save your maps. So it's no hindrance, and you can do a lot of these functions without signing in, but when you get to where you want to save your map, it's important to sign in. Okay, this is the link that, I believe this is the last slide, so we'll leave this up for a little bit. And these are the links to the 3 database and conservation planning atlases that are available in the state of Texas, each kind of overlapping in a lot of regards in terms of data sets, but also, like Blair said, filtering down to kind of make sure that you're finding the data that's right for your area. And our contact information is at the bottom as well. And so I believe if we want to, we can open it up for questions, Jeff, or if there are no questions, we can do a little bit of a live demo.
Yeah, so thanks for all that. And please, everybody join in if you have some questions or some comments or further clarifications, or even have some interest in directing some kind of live demonstration. Please speak up.